Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, fellow gamer. Welcome to episode 153 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm Lex Starwalker. On this show, we discuss the craft and art of game mastering. Not only do I pass along any knowledge I've gained over 25 plus years of running RPGs, I also share wisdom from guest GMs and listener GMs like you. Today, I'll discuss Tales from the Yawning Portal, an adventure supplement for Dungeons & Dragons. I give a full review of the book overall and each of the 7 included adventures. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters, truly worthy of the title. Welcome back to Game Master's Journey and welcome to episode 153. Really thrilled to be here talking about RPGs and specifically today some D&D adventures. I was almost going to say new D&D adventures, but they're not new adventures at all. Tales of the Yawning Portal is taking a handful of adventures from D&D's past and converting them for you for 5th edition. Now, it's kind of interesting because this book is very often discussed as being old classic adventures from the early days of D&D, and it's about half that. Actually, 3 of the adventures are not that old at all. 2 of them are from 3rd edition, and one of them was from the playtest for what became 5th edition D&D. The other 4 adventures come from the 1st edition days. Now, I want to send you on over to the show notes for this episode over at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney. I'll have some links for other resources for you in the show notes and things that I mention during the show today. Really quickly, I want to remind you that my D&D adventure, The Trickster's Labyrinth, is now up for sale on the website over at starwalkerstudios.com. I hope that you'll go check it out, and I want to thank everyone who's purchased the adventure so far. I hope you're enjoying it. I also want to send a thank you and a shout out to a couple new patrons of Star Walker Studios. Greetings and thank you to Logan Mack and Brandon Smith. Really appreciate all the patrons of Star Walker Studios, and I want to welcome the 2 of you specifically and thank you for your support. I could not do this show without the support of the patrons. Since I'm discussing Tales from the Yawning Portal today, I also wanted to let you know that I have started running some of the Tales from the Yawning Portal adventures for a group online and streaming that to my YouTube channel. We've started with the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakin, and so far we've run 3 sessions of that adventure, and we play that on Mondays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. If you can't be there for the live stream, you can watch the videos later on my YouTube channel, and you can find a link to that in the show notes over at starwalkerstudios.com. So I want to go ahead and move into the review, and I want to let you know that this is going to be a fairly long review today because there are 7 adventures in this book to talk about. And I wanted to go into each of these at least a little bit. Now, there are a lot of reviews out there for Tales from the Yawning Portal that do little more really than summarize the book for you. So I really wanted to take some time to tell you what I really think about this book, the good, the bad, and also what I think about each specific adventure. A good review like this takes time. Not only does it take time for me to prepare it and also to read through the material a few times, but it also is going to take time to do the actual review on the show today. And that's why I don't tend to do my reviews a day after the thing comes out, because I like to take the time to really absorb the material and give you a well thought out review. Because ultimately the point of these reviews is to let you know about this product so that you can make an informed decision of whether you want to spend your hard-earned dollars on it or not. So as I said, we're going to go into quite an in-depth discussion today, and we're going to get right to that. And if you have any comments or questions about today's topic, I'd love to hear from you. You can find all the ways to contact me over at the website at starwalkerstudios.com. Today, I want to talk about the latest D&D book that's come out, Tales from the Yawning Portal. And this is a book of adventures. Probably not surprising anyone that the latest D&D book is adventures. However, one thing that is significantly different about this book compared to the various other adventure books that have been put out for 5th edition by Wizards of the Coast is this is not one huge campaign. Instead, this is a series of unrelated, unconnected adventures. These are adventures from various points in the past of Dungeons and Dragons, all the way back to 1st edition, all the way up through the playtest of what became 5th edition. So the adventures included in this are the Sunless Citadel, the Forge of Fury, the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, White Plume Mountain, Dead and Thay, Against the Giants, Tomb of Horrors, and that's it. So I think the way that I will structure this review and discussion today is I will start out talking about the book overall, and then we'll go into each of the adventures individually, and then we'll wrap up with some more general discussion. So first off, I'd like to tell you what exactly this is, what's in here for those of you who haven't been able to pick up a physical copy and look through it. Like all of the D&D books for 5th edition, this is a hardcover book. Seems to be the same paper, binding, printing, et cetera, as we've seen in all the books. So fits right in with all the other books in the series. It's a full color book, and let's see how many pages we got here. 248 pages. Now, one thing I'll point out right away that is missing from this book is maps. Now, there are, of course, maps within the book, within the pages of the book, but there are no large maps that you can use at your table in your game. So those of you like me who remember back in the 1st and 2nd edition days, remember the days of the good old adventure box sets when they would come with usually a few poster size fold out maps that you could use for the adventure. And even the smaller modules often had larger maps that came with them. We haven't seen a lot of this in 5th edition. The one notable exception is Curse of Strahd, which came with a very nice double-sided poster map within it. One side of it showed the area of Barovia, and the other side showed Castle Ravenloft. And it also had some smaller maps of the various towns and settlements in the game. This book right here seems like a perfect opportunity to do something like that. However, Wizards did not do that. And I think that the maps are actually one of the larger downsides of this book. The maps themselves are all really nice as far as that goes. However, due to the fact that they are limited to the pages in the book and oftentimes are even smaller than a single page, they're very difficult to use. They're not going to be terribly useful at the table, and some of them are especially troublesome. So most of these maps actually, or a lot of them, aren't even an entire page. So they didn't even fill an entire page or even a 2-page spread of the book with a map. It'll be just part of a page, which makes it even smaller than it would need to be. Unfortunately, the map or maps that are on a 2-page spread, for instance, the map for the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, which is one huge, very long, horizontally map that covers 2 pages of the book. Unfortunately, they didn't lay it out properly. So if you look at this map in the book, it's a 2-page spread. We've got huge margins of wasted space around the outsides of all the pages. And then the center of the map, a good portion of it is down in the binding where you can't see it. For instance, with the Tamawakan map, you can't even see room number 24 because it's down in the binding, which is actually kind of important because there's a trap in that room, and you can't even really see where the trap is because it's down in the binding. And, it'd be one thing if they used every piece of available page real estate for this map to make it as big as possible, and a little bit got lost in the binding. But it's really frustrating when you see these huge margins of wasted space, and then a good part of the map is down in the binding where you can't see it. Why couldn't we have, halved the size of the left and right margins and put some margin space in the middle so that we could actually see the whole map? That'd be nice. So yeah, the maps are really frustrating. They're very small. The Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan is a big one that stands out as being problematic because part of it is down in the binding. And it's a large map that's only spanning 2 pages. And so the individual rooms are really small. And one that's even worse in that regard is the map for Dead and Thay, which is a huge dungeon complex that they put on one single page. And each individual part of that map is so small, it's really hard to make out. And there are these certain gates called white gates, I think, that the way they decided to show those on the map are these kind of white spots that really just look like they lighten the ink there. And when you put the entire map on one single page, you can't even really see those white gates. Now, they do blow up portions of the map throughout that adventure, but even then they're not giving a whole page to that portion of the map. So, as far as finding where those gates are, it's going to be difficult to impossible on the large map of the entire complex, which seems to me that would be one of the useful things of that map, of seeing where all those gates are. Now, the cartographer Mike Schley, who did some of the maps in the book, is offering high-res digital versions for sale on his site, which is super cool, and they're beautiful maps. And in fact, I'm running some of these adventures on my YouTube channel, and Mike was nice enough to give me promotional copies of those digital maps so that I could use them on Roll20, show you guys how beautiful they are, and hopefully you'll go to his site and buy them. So he did do the Tamawakan map, so I have a digital version where I can actually see the whole thing. He does, as part of that package, there is the Dead and Thay map and the Sunless Citadel, I believe, and some of the others. He didn't do all of the maps, but you can get those. However, you have to pay for them. They're not free, in addition to what you already paid for Tales from the Yawning Portal, and you're getting digital files. So, you either have to use that on a tablet or something, or you have to print it out yourself, which is going to cost more money. Or I think on Mike's website, you can buy physical copies and have those shipped to you. But, all of these are going to add to your expenses that you're putting in just to run this thing. And unfortunately, I think, especially with some of the adventures, the maps that are in the book itself aren't going to be terribly useful to you, or not as useful as they should be. So as far as how this book is laid out, we begin with an introduction that tells you a little bit about each of the adventures and kind of gives you a brief summary of each adventure. There's also a very, very brief discussion on trying to create a campaign and trying to, connect these very disparate adventures together into a single campaign. And it points out that these adventures were never intended to be run together in a campaign. They were created by very different people in very different times. And so if you want to do that, you've got your work cut out for you. And there is a small amount of guidance given in this book, but really not a whole lot. And you're going to have to do 99% of the work yourself. Now, one thing that they do to kind of help you out if you want to connect one or more of these adventures together into a larger campaign is they provide you with the Yawning Portal itself, which is a tavern in the Forgotten Realms in Waterdeep, specifically above the ruins of Undermountain. So, of course, you could use this tavern in another setting, like your homebrew setting or wherever you run D&D, if it's not in the Forgotten Realms. And there are some interesting details given for this tavern that you could use for this tavern or any other tavern if you want to add some character to it. So, for instance, there is a table of 20 different oddities that are on display in the tavern. And it's funny that they use the word oddities because really they're trinkets. So if you remember the list of trinkets in the PHB, these are very similar kinds of things to those. And they're just little curios that the owner of this tavern has collected from his own adventures and people who've been to the bar that have adventured themselves and left little souvenirs behind. As far as part of the guidance in leading into these adventures and maybe even connecting them together, Wizards acknowledges that the mysterious stranger sitting in the corner is terribly cliche, but then go ahead and proceeds to use it. Going so far as to give you a table or a couple tables about this mysterious stranger that gives you a quest. So I feel like they could have dug a little deeper here and come up with something a little more original, especially since they took the time to acknowledge that this is totally a cliche. Seems like they could have done something a little more original. But if you want to use the cliche, there is a table of 8 objectives or quests that this guy might send you on, and a table of 8 mysteries about this person, like he's really a dragon in disguise or something like that. And I must say that, these tables aren't terribly original either. So unless this is literally your first hour as a dungeon master, you probably could come up with as good or better ideas yourself than what's in these tables, unfortunately. We then have some information about the proprietor of this tavern. We have a table of 10 possible other patrons that might be in the tavern. And, one thing that's really bizarre about this, I get that Wizards feels this need to set everything that they do in 5th edition in the Forgotten Realms. It's their pet setting. And I get that they're going to take every opportunity they can to try to convince us to use the realms. But it's really odd because they spend a couple pages or a few pages on this Yawning Portal Tavern. It's what the book is named after. And the whole shtick of this tavern is it has a well within it, a big pit that goes deep into the ground to Undermountain. And yet Undermountain is not the adventure that's in here. Undermountain was an entire campaign. It was a mega dungeon. It's not in here. There's nothing about Undermountain in here. So why have, for your kind of bookend tavern, why have it be this perfect hook into an adventure that isn't even in this book? Seems like you could have come up with a tavern that was instead a hook for, say, the Sunless Citadel, which is the first adventure in the book, or maybe even a hook to all of the adventures. And yeah, sure, you could use the Yawning Portal to hook into any of these adventures with a little creativity on your own. However, while your PCs are in this tavern, hopefully getting hooked into the adventure that you want to run, they've got this massive hook in the form of the central feature of the tavern itself, staring them in the face saying, hey, wouldn't you rather go down to Undermountain? I wonder how many DMs who try to use the Yawning Portal and actually describe it as it is and have the well in the Undermountain end up having their whole campaigns derailed because the PCs decide they want to go down the rope into the pit in the Undermountain, which is really what this seems to be setting up. Even players that are trying to be, quote, nice players and roll with the DM might think that this is what they're supposed to do, because this book really hangs a lantern on this pit going down in the Undermountain. So yeah, it's almost like they intended to do Undermountain for this book, which probably would have taken the whole book. And then at the last minute decided to use these other adventures instead, but for whatever reason didn't bother changing the beginning whole Yawning Portal part. So odd to say the least. All right, so that is the introduction to the book. Then we have a chapter for each of the individual adventures. And then at the end of the book, we have a few new magic items and some new monsters. Some of these monsters are actually monsters that were in Volo's guide. So I kind of go back and forth how I feel about this. On the one hand, it's cool that if they're going to use a monster from Volo's guide, they reprint it in here for, someone that doesn't have Volo's guide. So you don't feel like you have to go get Volo's guide to use one of these monsters. But on the other hand, I'm not so happy that they're taking up page space in this book in the section that's supposed to be new monsters and giving me monsters that I already have if I have Volo's guide. I think a better way to approach it would have been use this monster if you have Volo's guide. Otherwise, use this other monster from the monster manual, or even better, just come up with a new monster. But whatever. What are you going to do? So like I said, there are a few new magic items in here. Honestly, none of them are really that amazing or mind-blowing. I wasn't really excited about any one of these magic items as far as adding it to my game. And anytime I'd get something like this that would have new magic items, even if I don't plan on running the adventure, even if I'm in the middle of another campaign, I'm always very eager to check out the magic items because maybe I'll see something cool that I want to hand out as treasure in whatever else I'm running. And yeah, seems often the case in the magic items added in these 5th edition adventures, they're just so far have been pretty mediocre. Not anything that made me really excited to use it in this or any other campaign. So what are some thoughts about just the product overall before we start digging into the individual adventures? Well, I already discussed the maps and the issues with the maps. The maps are very nice to look at, but they're very small and may be difficult for you to actually use. I really think that there could have been much more guidance given on connecting these into a campaign. I really think that they should have either just ignored that and just presented this as a book of disparate adventures and just completely left it up to GMs to decide how they're going to do it if they wanted to connect them together. I think, most of us as DMs, we can figure that out on our own anyway. I think they should have either just avoided it entirely or actually given us something that we could work with and actually spend some time and some thought and some page count on it. They give us the Yawning Portal that you could possibly use as a way to connect the adventures together. They don't really give you a lot of guidance on doing that. And the Yawning Portal itself is problematic because it seems a much better hook into Undermountain than it does any of these other adventures. Also, the claim is made that each of these adventures will give enough XP to get player characters to the next adventure in the book, and this just simply isn't the case. It's kind of interesting because most of the adventures that have been put out by Wizards for 5th edition have used the milestone method of advancement. And it seems like it would have been super easy to do it that way with this and could have avoided this problem altogether. But for some reason, they chose not to do that. Instead, they're assuming that you're going to grant XP for encounters. Now, I haven't gone through every adventure and totaled up the XP, but I have started running the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, which is an adventure that starts with level 5 characters and presumably gives enough XP to get them to level 8, which is the level they need to do for the next adventure, White Plume Mountain. However, as I started running the adventure and preparing for the encounters and looking at the fact that my PCs were starting out with, I believe, 6,500 XP and needed, I believe, 14,000 XP just to get to 6th level, I started thinking, you know what? I really don't think there's enough encounters here to get the PCs at 8th level. I just don't see it. So I actually went through and totaled up all of the XP for all of the encounters. And the adventure says it's for 4 to 5 players. And if you have 4 players running it as written and assuming you use at least a few of the random encounters, you will just barely have enough XP to get your PCs from 5th to 6th level, not 8th. If you have 5 players, which again, the adventure is recommended for 4 to 5 players, you won't even have enough XP to get them to 6th level. Much rather 8th. So, a ball got dropped somewhere. Someone forgot to carry some ones or something. But yeah, the math doesn't hold up there at all. So, I don't know if the rest of them, if you're okay, and it's just this one particular one. But, I was planning on starting at Hidden Shrine and going through a few of these adventures. And now, I'm going to be in a situation where I've got 2 levels worth of XP to make up. I'm going to have to come up with my own stuff between the adventures, which is fine. I don't mind doing that, but don't tell me that there's enough XP to get the PCs from one adventure to another if there's not. Maybe check that before you make that claim in the book. And like I said, it's a glaring mistake. I mean, it's not like it's almost enough to get them to 8th level. It's not even enough to get them to 6th level. WTF, right? So yeah, I don't know why they didn't just do milestone. Then they wouldn't have had to worry about it. But honestly, even if I was doing milestone XP running the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, I wouldn't feel right leveling the characters from 5th to 8th level in that adventure. There's just not nearly enough material there for that much of a level game. There's just no way. Now, while we're still talking about the adventures overall and the book overall, one thing that I really like about the adventures in here is we're given much better trap descriptions than we've seen in previous 5th edition adventures, which is good because there's a lot of traps in this book. We're given much more detailed explanations of how you might notice a trap, how you can figure out how the trap works, and how you would disarm the trap, and which rolls you would make for each of those steps. So if you remember, not too long ago, Wizards put out an Unearthed Arcana about traps where they kind of expanded and discussed their thinking about traps. And it seems like they took notes on their own lecture there and used that in these traps. So that's awesome because, a lot of us have wondered in the past adventures, like how exactly to deal with traps. And they do a much better job in this book of explaining how the traps work, explaining what skills PCs can use to deal with them, and all of that good stuff. So if you're still confused about how traps work, well, first of all, check out that Unearthed Arcana, but also you can check out the traps in this adventure, and it makes it much more clear what they were thinking as far as how traps work and how you interact with them. In the very beginning of the book, in the introduction, they list all the adventures in the book, and they have 2 or 3 paragraphs about each adventure, just kind of giving you, a brief overview of that adventure. And then when you get to the chapters on each adventure, they have like a little sidebar where they show the original cover art for the original adventure, and they give you a little information again. So I'm going to go through each of the adventures a bit. I'll tell you a little bit about each adventure and tell you what I think about it. So the first adventure in the book is the Sunless Citadel, and I'll just look at the little sidebar about it to tell you a little bit about it. It was by Bruce Cordell. This was written for 3rd edition in 2000, and this is an adventure that is for 1st level characters and claims that it will take them to 3rd level. I don't know if it does or not. The only ones I really looked heavy into the XP for was Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan. So the rest of these, I don't know if there's enough XP really there to get them to 3rd level or not. Now, this is an adventure I have a little bit of experience with. I actually have the 3rd edition version, and I was actually planning to run it in 5th edition and had gone through converting it myself and then never ran it because by the time I got done converting it, I realized I really didn't want to run it and it seemed kind of boring. So I've read through it. I haven't actually run it. I haven't played it. But based on my read through of the 3rd edition one and my read through of this version, seems pretty much the same. The map looks very, very similar, if not exactly the same. I didn't compare them side to side. But the adventure itself, the flow itself seems very much the same, if not identical. The encounters, the kinds of monsters that you're fighting, all seem very similar, if not identical to the 3rd edition version. So I guess one thing that I'll say, if you're considering whether or not to get this book, if you have the old versions of these adventures, I don't think you need to get this book, honestly, because it's really not that hard to convert from first, second, or third edition in the fifth edition. I have no idea about fourth edition. I didn't play it, but there's no fourth edition adventures in here anyway, so it's irrelevant. But, I did Sunless Citadel myself. It was super easy. I converted White Plume Mountain myself. It was super easy. Wizards put out a free PDF on guidelines on converting from other editions in the fifth edition. And it's really easy to do. You can check out that PDF and it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, in a nutshell, you just swap the monsters with fifth edition monsters. So the third edition Sunless Citadel has a lot of kobolds and goblins in it. So you just use fifth edition kobolds and goblins and, it's not that hard. So yeah, if you have these old adventures, I don't think it's worth getting this for reprints, basically. The conversion isn't that hard. However, if you don't have the adventures, I'd get the Yawning Portal because it's going to be a lot easier to get and find than those old adventures. And it's probably even going to be cheaper because a lot of, if not all of those old adventures are out of print now. So you're going to be buying them on eBay and paying a premium for them. All right, so back to Sunless Citadel. So like I said, I haven't played it or run it myself, but I have read through it, both the third edition and the fifth edition version. As far as the adventure itself, it's fine for a level 1 adventure. I've talked about on the show, I'm not really a fan of level 1 gameplay in fifth edition. I think it's great if you're a brand new DM with the system or if you're running for players that are brand new to the system. But if you're all veterans, I mean, do yourselves a favor and skip first level and probably second level too. And, this adventure is a great example of what I don't like about first level play. It's kind of, non-exciting, non-heroic, just kind of ho-hum, standard fare kind of thing. Now, that said, if you want an adventure for first level characters, this is a decent one. I'd say it's about on par with the Lost Mines of Phandelver. Some people probably like one more than the other, but I think they're about equal as far as how much I personally like them. Sunless Citadel is more, how should I say, it's more well connected within itself. It's one dungeon basically for the whole adventure, where Lost Mines of Phandelver is kind of a few different adventures put together. So one might appeal to you more than the other. Would you rather run one larger dungeon for, first to third level, or would you rather run a few different adventures that connect together? If you want to run just one big dungeon, then Sunless Citadel is probably for you. If you'd rather have some, separate adventures in different locations that connect together, then Lost Mine of Phandelver is probably for you. Now, the nice thing about Sunless Citadel is you don't have to buy the beginner box if you don't need or want the beginner box, but you have to buy a book of all these other adventures. So, it's not like you can get just Sunless Citadel. So I feel like there's pros and cons either way. It just really depends what you want. I will tell you, in this adventure, you're going to be fighting a lot of kobolds and a lot of goblins. So, first level standard fare. Now, one thing I will say is that if you are a fairly new DM or a new DM, this adventure is pretty good at kind of holding your hand, at least in the beginning, and introducing you as a dungeon master to running a dungeon crawl. So I think I would recommend it a little bit more highly for newer DMs and newer groups, because it is a pretty good introduction to the system. But if you're all veterans, you might want to find something a little more exciting to do. A little more, not exciting. It's exciting enough for a first level adventure. Something a little more unique, a little more different. It's very standard, a dungeon with kobolds and goblins kind of thing. All right, the next adventure is the Forge of Fury, which was also a third edition adventure. This one was written by Richard Baker, originally published in 2000. And this is for third level characters and will take them to fifth level. Again, I don't know for sure if it will. Seems like it's lengthy enough that it should be able to, but I didn't add up the XP. I don't know. I kind of have the same feelings about Forge of Fury that I did about Sunless Citadel. To me, my personal opinion is it's a pretty generic, uninspired dungeon. I feel like I've played in dungeons like this before. I feel like I've run dungeons like this before, probably of my own creation. But, it's already made for you. You don't have to do it yourself. In this dungeon, you will encounter a lot of orcs. So if you dig orcs, you might be into this. And you're exploring a dwarven facility. So there's a lot of dwarf stuff going on. So if you have one or more PCs that are dwarves, they might get a kick out of this. And yeah, this one, tiny little maps. They don't sometimes even take half a page. Just tiny little maps. I don't know why they couldn't have at least given a page to the maps. I mean, each of these adventures starts with a full page illustration, which are okay, but not great, honestly. And I much rather would have had a full page map than a full page mediocre illustration. So they have these full page, full color illustrations, which are okay. And then these tiny little quarter of a page maps. It's like, what the hell? Again, it almost seems like they planned to give you actual maps like in the back of the book or something. And then at the end decided not to and didn't change their layout and just left these tiny little maps in here. All right, the next adventure is The Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan. This one I'm running. I had the idea to run these adventures for a group myself. I'm running them online. I'm streaming them on my YouTube channel. And I thought it would be fun because I have started online games of Tyranny of Dragons and Curse of Strahd and Storm King's Thunder and never finished any of them. Now, in all fairness, I never had any intention of finishing Storm King's Thunder when I started it. But, and I told the players that we probably wouldn't finish it. But, that just goes to show, right? And I think that's personally a big problem with these adventure paths that they've been putting out is, of all the people that run or play them, how many of those people ever actually finish them? And Wizards asked a survey about that some time ago, and they didn't share their results with us. But I would love to know what percentage of players and DMs that started one of those adventure paths ever actually finished it. I'd be willing to guess it's probably well under 10%, probably under 5%, maybe even under 1%. I would not be surprised. It's just, it will take at least a year of real world time to get through one of those campaigns. And there are just so many things that can change in a year. People's jobs change, their school schedules change, they have kids or whatever. I mean, the odds of you being able to run a campaign that long and everybody can do it for that long are pretty small. And then you just run into the fact that, a lot of times these campaigns aren't written super well and you get kind of sick of them long before you can finish them. So that's the exciting thing about this book is, they're separate adventures. Each adventure is a smaller, more manageable size, and you have a much better chance of actually finishing it with your group. So I had the idea of, hey, let's run these adventures. And, it's summertime, it's not a great time to start a D&D group anyway. But I was like, well, hey, we'll just take it one adventure at a time. And if we don't get through all of them, at least we'll hopefully finish the adventure that we're on. And also every time we finish an adventure, it's a point where I, as a GM, could say, hey guys, I'm done with this. I've had enough. It's a point where any of the players could say, hey guys, I've had enough of this. I'm out. It's an easy place where I could bring new players in. So I thought it would be really cool. And I thought, hey, maybe I'll try to string them together into some kind of meta plot. Maybe I'll just run them as is. I don't know, but we'll do it. So as I started going through this book, planning it, I was already thinking I'd probably skip Sunless Citadel. Because like I said, I already went through the trouble of converting the whole thing before this book came out and then decided not to run it because I thought it was going to be boring. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll start with Forge of Fury. And after reading through Forge of Fury again, I was like, yeah, I think this is going to be boring too. And like really long and kind of a slog. And the payoff just isn't there for me. So Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan was the first book or the first adventure in this book that I was excited to run. And I am excited to run it. And I am running it. And we've played 2 sessions so far. And I'm having a blast with it. It's a lot of fun. Now, I will admit, one of the reasons I think I like this adventure so much is because it has a South American / Central American flair to it. And when I went to school getting my anthropology degree, that's what I focused on, was Central and South America. So I was learning all about the Native American cultures from South and Central America. And so I really love that this is pulling in inspiration from Mayan and Aztec and Toltec cultures and art and iconography and even the names and all that. And I just love it. So the original adventure was published in 1980 for first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, written by Harold Johnson and Jeff Leeson. And it even says here, the design of the temple draws heavily on Mayan and Aztec/Toltec mythology and society. In the original publication, dungeon masters were encouraged to research these real-world background elements to add depth and realism to the character's experience. Why are they not encouraging us to research it for 5th edition? I don't know. Does Wizards think we can't read? Does Wizards think we're such a bunch of rubes that we won't want to research a historical culture that the adventure is based on? I don't know. Are those assumptions correct? Probably. I don't know. I mean, I will confess, I haven't done any research specifically for this adventure, but I did my research in college while I was earning my degree, so I don't really need to do research. But I'd like to think that if I was told, hey, this is based on this certain mythology, if you don't know anything about it, maybe do some research to inform you. I'd like to think that I would. I think I would. I like researching that kind of stuff. Hell, the other day, I was researching different historical pantheons to help me designing gods for my homebrew world of Primordia. So I think I totally would. And just as an aside, this is something that makes me sad about recent editions of D&D. In 1st and 2nd edition, you saw this all the time, how it drew a lot from history. For instance, I was looking through the 2nd edition Castles and Strongholds book a couple months ago, and so much of that is from history, and they make historical references. And where is that these days? I mean, did nobody on the D&D team take any history classes, or they think we don't care, or what? I really miss that. It's like you're completely on your own now if you want to find historical context, because they've completely gutted that out of the game, and I miss it. Oh, the good old days. Anyway, going on to the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan. So as I said earlier, this claims to be an adventure for 5th to 8th, or for 5th level characters, and will take them to 8th level, but it won't. If you use XP, it probably won't even take them to 6th level unless you run a lot of random encounters. So the first 2 adventures, I think, were pretty good examples of your standard generic dungeon crawl, but they were also your standard generic dungeon crawl. Weren't terribly interesting or exciting or unique or any of that. This adventure, on the other hand, is interesting and is unique, if only because it's drawing on South and Central American art and mythology. And so it's just different than a lot of what we're used to that draws so heavily on European mythology. And this is realized very well, not just in the design of the dungeon and the descriptions of the various rooms and chambers in the dungeon itself, but right down to the monsters that you encounter, the NPCs that you encounter, and the treasure that you find. And I think any of us who are designing adventures, whether we're designing adventures to publish, especially if you're designing adventures to publish, but even if you're designing adventures just for your own group, this is a great inspiration and a great raising of the bar that you should really hold yourself to, of making, the treasure and the descriptions and all of that flavorful. Instead of just giving generic crap that you rolled up from the DMG, for gems and art objects, come up with things that fit together and that fit the place where the PCs are, and that tell a story and that give a sense of being in the ruins of a lost culture and things like that. It's really cool. So yeah, the treasure is really cool and interesting. It all has a gold piece value, of course, but you're going to find a lot of stuff in this adventure that you've never seen before, and it's super cool. I just wish that they had more art. Now, luckily, in these days of the internet, you can go on Google and you can find images for a lot of this stuff if you know what to look for. But you may not know what to look for because, again, they don't give you the historical context. But it would have been nice if they had more art of what the treasures and things that you find look like. The art that they do have does a pretty good job of getting across what these things look like, but there's just not nearly enough of it. So I think that the contrast between this adventure and the previous two, Sunless Citadel and The Forge of Fury, is pretty pronounced. And, if those were examples of kind of what not to do, of kind of generic dungeon design, this is an example of what we should strive for, of making a really unique and flavorful place for the PCs to explore. So I guess maybe when you play D&D, you just have to wait until 5th level to be able to do anything interesting, which again is why I say, why not just start at 5th level? Why waste time telling stories that aren't interesting? Time is too precious. Some of the traps in the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan are really cool, and some of them are pretty ruthless, although the ones that are really ruthless, like have really terrible effects, like, say, spoiler. If you don't want a spoiler, skip ahead about 10 seconds here. Like, for instance, making you fall asleep for 5,000 years. Really dangerous effect, really terrible effect, but the DC for the save is pretty low. So we just got to that point with my group, and I think I don't think any of the characters failed. No, I think one failed, but someone used their inspiration to let them reroll because it was such a low DC. It was kind of like a less than a 50 or more than a 50-50 chance to succeed, I think, but still really cool. And a lot of the traps are pretty imaginative and cool. And yeah, there's just some really cool design elements in the adventure. I don't want to go into too much details because I don't want to spoil it for anyone that's going to run it or play it. But let me just say that there is a certain mechanic present that is there, I think, to dissuade PCs from taking short and long rests. And it's super simple as long as you remember to do it. And it's really effective. It's really effective. And if you really want to know what this is, you can watch my first session, and we deal with it as soon as they get into the temple towards the beginning of the session. So you can just watch that first session and you'll know what I'm talking about. And reading it, I even thought, I'm like, this doesn't seem like a big deal. It seems like it'll be more annoying to deal with than anything. But at least with my group, it's been incredibly effective in making them really think about every minute that they spend and what they're doing. And I'm really amazed by it and just how simple and easy it is, and going to be using things like that more in the future. I really love the encounter with Tloke's Popolocus, which actually, that was the cliffhanger of my last session, was my PCs just got into that encounter, and we're going to resolve it this coming week. So you might want to watch that too, because, oh my gosh, it's going to be cool. Now, one thing I will say about this dungeon, and this is very much, the way things were in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I guess that's why it was advanced. This thing is very dense. This is not an adventure that you can run just on the fly, reading it as you go, without prepping it. And honestly, I don't think you should do that with any adventure. Not if you respect your players and your own time, to be honest. But this one, you will fail horribly and ridiculously if you try. Just this one encounter, for instance, spans about 2 to 3 pages. And it's not like just a bunch of filler information you don't need to know. It's all things that you need to know. Almost every room in this place is elaborate in what's there, as far as what the player characters see, as far as what's going on, as far as hidden things they can find, and traps and things like that, and mechanics and creatures. And it's really dense. And even if you do prepare, I find myself kind of reading ahead when I think I know where the players are going next while they're talking amongst themselves or whatever. I'm scanning the next room because there's just so much there. You can't just hold it all in your head. So it is challenging to run in that way. I wouldn't want to throw this at a brand new GM, but if you're a brand new GM, you should start at level 1. So you should have some sessions under your belt before you get here to level 5 anyway. But that's about the only time I'll recommend level 1 is new GM, new players. But for experienced GMs too, it's going to be challenging. You're probably going to miss things here and there. So this is an adventure. I would say you can't prep too much for this. And once you've done like your basic prep, like understanding how the monsters work and things like that, as far as like what else can I do to prep, I would just focus on the area where your player characters are, and just read those room descriptions over and over and over to try to internalize as much of that as you can. So when you're running it at the table, you can remember the gist of it. Because if you're relying on just reading it while you're at the table, you're going to miss all kinds of stuff because there's way too much to read while you're actually at the table. Now, I do think that this could have been laid out and designed better as far as how the information is presented. I don't think that they put enough effort into revising these adventures. I mean, I haven't read the original Hidden Shrine of Tamawak, and I don't know that they just copy pasted the thing, but it seems very much like a first edition or second edition adventure, the way the information is laid out. Another thing I really like about this adventure is it actually presents some consequences for just blatant tomb robbing, which is really cool. There's so many adventures where you're robbing tombs and basically desecrating ancient sites. And so many times, there's just no consequence for that. And I think it's a lot more fun if there are consequences. Another thing I particularly like about this dungeon is it makes the comprehend languages spell useful. The PCs are exploring this facility left by an ancient culture, and they spoke an ancient language that likely none of the PCs speak. And this is really cool. So many times in D&D, we just hand wave the whole language thing and everybody speaks common. And it's really cool to have at least the nod to realism of, well, no, not everybody speaks the same language, and you're not always going to be able to understand everything. And, a lot of times in a lot of campaigns, comprehend languages can be a useless spell. So it's really great, in my opinion, to see it be very useful in this adventure. Now, I will say that they could have come up with a better hook for getting the PCs into the adventure, but I think that's kind of true of all the adventures in this book. I don't know what it is with hooks, but Wizards just seems to kind of phone it in when it comes to giving you hooks and ways to get players interested in an adventure. It's almost like they assume that you're just going to tell your players, hey, we're doing Yawning Portal, and their characters are just going to go along with it and aren't going to need any kind of in-character reason, or will just accept some really contrived or really flimsy reason that the characters are going after this thing. So, I wish that they would put a little more thought into giving you some real good examples of ways that you could entice characters into following these adventures. Now, one weakness I do think that exists in this adventure is in the random encounter table. A lot of the random encounters are just kind of pointless and a waste of time, and or at least they seem like they are. I might actually try one or two of them in my group just to see if they really are as pointless as they seem like. For instance, one of the random encounters is 2d4 fire beetles, which are CR0 creatures, which means they're worth 0 XP unless they actually pose some kind of threat, in which case they're worth 10 XP. But it's like, why is this even an encounter? Like, what is the point of this encounter? Usually, in my mind, the point of a random encounter, especially in a dungeon, is to give some feeling of time pressure and to give the players a sense that they can't just take a rest whenever they want, and that there are consequences to not efficiently getting through here as quickly as they can. And this doesn't really seem to do that, because so many of the encounters are just not even going to be an easy encounter. They're just going to be a face roll. And, it doesn't even, according to the rules, it takes more than an hour of combat to interrupt a long rest. So there's not even the rationale of, oh, well, even if the encounter is easy, it interrupts their rest. Well, no, it doesn't. Unless the encounter does some kind of appreciable damage to them or depletes some resources, it's not going to accomplish anything. And I just don't see a bunch of CR0 creatures even depleting resources. The players can just use their cantrips and their basic attacks to take them out, and they're probably not going to take much, if any, damage. But I don't know. I may try them. There is the bounded accuracy of 5th edition, so maybe even CR0 creatures might do a little damage. And, that's kind of a thing with this adventure is there are a lot of sources of damage, and a lot of them aren't very much. But I think the idea is that over time they add up, and the player characters don't really have much, if any, time to rest. So even a hit point here, a hit point there, it adds up over time. So we'll have to see. But it does seem like the random encounters are really easy and aren't super interesting. So if I was creating an adventure myself, I usually make my random encounters scary and deadly, because to me, that's the point is, if there's a random encounter, it's either because you're just very unlucky or it's because you're taking way too much time doing something, in which case, I think it should be something that the players feel like, oh, I wish we could have avoided that altogether. But that's just me. And my final criticism of this particular adventure, and this is probably the one I'll talk the most about because it's the one I've spent the most time with, is it's a little anticlimactic. The biggest battles, what you would consider a boss fight, actually occur fairly early in the adventure, and I think the most challenging one occurs really early in the adventure. And at the end of the adventure, it just kind of like trickles off. There's not like a big boss battle at the end. There's not a final super deadly trap to overcome or anything like that. It's just kind of like, well, you've reached the end of the map. The adventure's over. Like that's kind of how it ends. So it could just be, a difference in the way we think of adventure design now, because probably a lot of it because of video games and the idea of boss fights and things like that. But I am a little concerned that it's going to seem a little anticlimactic at the finish.
This is Matthew Colville, and you're listening to Game Master's Journey.
I want to give a quick shout out to the patrons of Starwalker Studios. The support of the patrons makes this show possible. If you enjoy Game Master's Journey and you'd like to give a little back, becoming a patron is a great way to do so. Patrons get some cool perks like game material I make for Primordia and access to a special monthly podcast I produce just for the patrons. I'd also like to give a huge shout out and thank you to my Tier 4 patron, Mr. Steve Strickland. Let's hear it for Steve. You the man. Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you to all the patrons. You can find out more about becoming a patron by clicking on the Patreon button at the top of the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. So the next adventure in the book is White Plume Mountain, and this is a classic. Like I said earlier, I had worked on converting this myself to 5th edition. Never got around to running it, but this is just one of those adventures when you ask grognards, what's your favorite D&D adventure of all time, you'll hear this one a lot. So White Plume Mountain was originally published for AD&D First Edition in 1979 by Lawrence Schick. And this is, I think, the adventure that led to the coining of the phrase Funhouse Dungeon. This is just a crazy dungeon. There are some crazy traps in here, just some crazy, weird things. And it's just crazy. I can't think of a better word for it. It's just really weird. Things you've never seen before. You just don't know what to expect. And I'm looking forward to running it. This is a very old school dungeon. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I really don't have a lot to say about it because I haven't run it yet. And I haven't spent a lot of time prepping it yet. But this is one that I am excited to run. I'm excited to run Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, and I'm excited to run White Plume Mountain. And I got to tell you, reading through the book, I was getting a little bummed out between the introduction and the first two adventures. I was like, oh man, this seems really ho-hum. But Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan really really wowed me, and I'd never seen that adventure before. And White Plume Mountain I have seen before. I do have the original, but I still like it, and I'm looking forward to running it. I haven't compared this side by side of the original with the original, but it seems very similar. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but some of the weird things that I remember from the original, I'll just mention kayaks, are totally in this. So I don't know if everything's exactly the same, but the high points that I remembered, right down to some of the powerful items that the PCs can find in the dungeon, are the same. So that's super cool. So speaking of those powerful items, that is one thing that I will make note of in this adventure. I'm not going to tell you what the items are because I don't want to spoil the adventure for you. But I tell you what, if you really want to know, you can figure it out by opening your Dungeon Master's Guide, going to the legendary magic items, and looking around, because I'm pretty sure there are 3 specific items I'm thinking of that are in this dungeon, and I'm pretty sure it mentions in the Dungeon Master's Guide that those items are from White Plume Mountain. At least one of them it does. I think it does with all 3 of them. So there are 3 items that are in this dungeon. They are very powerful legendary items. And if you know the way kind of the magic item classification works in 5th edition, you have common items, uncommon, rare, very rare, and then legendary. It's just like magic cards, basically. But legendary, there is nothing beyond legendary other than artifacts, which are, they're kind of their own classification. They're not even technically, well, they are a magic item, but we don't really think of them as magic item. They're like their own thing. They're like outside the scale of magic items. So legendary items kind of like there's a definite like minimum power level that something needs to be a legendary item, but there's not an upper limit, at least until you start thinking maybe this should be an artifact. So, you can have powerful legendary items, and then you can have really powerful legendary items. These are really powerful legendary items. The thing is this adventure is for 8th level characters. So, if you're going by the suggested magic item progression in the DMG as far as when to award different kinds of magic items, you're not supposed to be handing out legendary items at 8th level. Much rather 3 of them that are each very powerful. So that's something, if you're considering running this adventure, you want to be aware of right away and decide what you're going to do about that. Are you cool with these player characters having these crazy powerful legendary items at 8th level? Now, it's kind of funny because in the suggested hooks into this adventure, one of them, and I believe these are actually the original hooks from the original adventure, and these I think are actually some of the better hooks in this book, in the Yawning Portal. One of the hooks suggests that the PCs have been hired by NPCs to retrieve these items. Maybe these NPCs are powerful adventurers in their own right, or maybe I think that the hook actually suggests that they're collectors and like art collectors or whatever, and they want these items. And I don't know if the authors of this adventure seriously thought that player characters would go on this adventure and find, these powerful uber magic items and then just hand them over to their NPC person that hired them, their benefactor or whatever. I don't know. The original adventure was for 8 to 10 level characters. This adventure is for, it'll take them from 8th to 9th level. Again, I haven't checked that, but that's what the book claims. So did they really think that would happen? Did they really think that they're going to get these powerful items and here you go, here's the items that we got? Or is it more likely that the PCs are going to be like, I think I'm going to keep this super powerful magic item. What's this art collector going to do about it, right? So I guess, that's, if you're the DM and you're running it and you're going with that and you're thinking that the player characters are going to just hand these items over at the end, and you're, that's how you're hedging your bet of not giving your 9th level characters 3 legendary magic items. You might want to have some contingencies in place, or ask yourself, what are these NPCs going to do if the player characters don't hand them over? Because I think there's a good chance that at least, some of them, they're not going to want to hand them over. So what are you going to do if that happens? It's something you're going to want to think about. Now, each of these items is really interesting. They're really powerful, but they all have kind of a downside to them too. And one of them specifically, I could see there being a lot of groups where just no one wants to use the item, not because the item is bad necessarily, but just because they don't want to do what they would have to do in order to use the item. Because all of these items are sentient, and they all, most are all sentient items. You have to be a certain kind of person for the item to accept you and to let you use it. And there's one of them that, you may just not have a character in the group that the item will accept. And if that's the case, then, you don't have to worry about that particular item. But there's another one where you just may not have a player that wants to do what the item wants them to do, in which case, well, there's another one you don't have to worry about. And then the third item could either be awesome for your campaign or could ruin your campaign. So you definitely want to read these items over before you start the adventure and decide what you're going to do. Now, personally, I guess it depends how you're going with this, right? If you're going with the art collector thing where they're hired by an NPC and they're supposed to retrieve these items, but they're supposed to surrender them at the end, and kind of all along it's presented as, these items aren't going to be yours to keep, and you're okay with that and the players are okay with that, then I guess that could be fine. And, they can experience these powerful magic items. They can even maybe use them a little bit while they're in the dungeon and kind of get a taste of that uber high level power. But then at the end of the adventure, they give them up and that's the end of it. And that, if that works for you and your group, then that could be a cool way to handle it. Another way to approach it would be maybe you're just running this as a one shot. And so you don't care, because once this adventure is over, you're never going to do anything with those characters anyway. So you don't care that these 9th level characters have legendary items, in which case, it's not a problem. If, on the other hand, though, you like the idea of them having these powerful items and you're going to run with that for the rest of the campaign and be like, hey, they're only 9th level, but at least 3 of them are going to have really super powerful magic items. And I think that's cool. I think that's awesome. And I'm going to do stuff with that. If that's you, then you really want to look at these items and you want to look at your player characters and make sure that they're actually going to want these items. Because like I said, there's one item that, well, I'll just say it's a racial thing. It has to be used by a character of a certain race. And if you don't have a PC of that race in the group, then the item is useless to them. The other item requires a character to follow a specific deity. So if you don't have a character that follows that deity, then they have to basically convert to following this deity to use this item, which, some players might be okay with that because they're like, hey, this item's awesome, I don't care. But I think a lot of players would be like, well, that's not really in character for my character to do that, especially if the character already has a deity that they honor or whatever. And there's also the possibility that this is a deity that you don't even have in your campaign or you don't do anything with. The third item can totally take a character down a dark path. And, that's something else that you want to think about as a DM. Is this going to be a thing where the character doesn't want to go down a dark path and they're going to resist it? And that could be some really awesome storytelling. Or is this going to be a thing where the character is going to use this or the player is going to use this as an excuse to just be a murder hobo and go down the dark path, grinning and cackling all the way? And if you think that's cool and the group thinks that's cool, then that could be awesome. But it's something you want to think about. If you don't want characters going down dark paths, then that item could throw a wrench into your campaign. So what I'm saying is you want to look at these items. You want to think about the impact they're going to have with the campaign. You want to think about, will these items be useful or attractive to any of the player characters and any of the players? And if not, is that a problem? And if it is, you may want to swap them out for different items. So there are other powerful sentient magic items in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or you could come up with your own. Or you could take these items and alter them so that they fit a player character better or fit your campaign better. But this is definitely something you want to think about and you want to address before you even start the adventure, and know what you're going to do about these items. Are you just going to run it as is and see what happens? Are you going to swap them out for items that are going to work better for your group or work better for your campaign? Are you going to modify them? What are you going to do? So me personally, I'm actually not sure what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of let things go because we're doing Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan now. So I have some time before they finish that to decide what I'm going to do. I'm personally kind of leaning toward just leaving the items as is because they're kind of iconic items. And I think it'll be interesting either way, whether the players end up using them or not. I think it'll be interesting either way. And what I may do as far as the hook is maybe have a benefactor that wants the items and make it a decision that the players have to make of, either we give up these powerful magic items that maybe we want, maybe we don't want to this person, or we double cross this person and we keep them, in which case, there will be ramifications of that, which will be loads of fun for me as a dungeon master. Or maybe they don't want this person to have these powerful items. That could be a way I could go too, is have the benefactor be someone of questionable intentions. And maybe they have a discussion of, do we really want this person to have these powerful items? So yeah, that'll be a fun thing to figure out. All right, the next adventure is called Dead and Thay. And this is for 9th level characters, and will take those characters to 11th level. Or the book says maybe even higher. Now, again, I haven't checked this. I haven't done the math, but I believe it because this adventure is substantial. And unlike some of the others, there are a lot of encounters in this adventure, and specifically encounters with creatures and NPCs and monsters that are going to give out XP. So I think it's very likely that there's plenty of XP in this adventure for the player characters to earn. Dead and Thay is unique among these adventures. It's the most recent, the newest one, was produced in 2014 by Scott Fitzgerald Gray as an adventure for the D&D Encounters organized play program, and served as a play test for the rules that eventually became 5th edition. So this is really cool. I did not do D&D Encounters, so this is my first exposure to this adventure, and it's really cool. It's a mega dungeon. In the book, it goes from page 109 to 163. So, it over 50 pages of goodness here. This, again, would have benefited from bigger maps, especially the map of the entire facility, which is on page 111, is just headache inducing because it's been shrunk down so much. But what are you going to do? Wish I missed the boxes. I don't miss boxes, but I miss the maps that came in them. So this adventure is another one I'm really excited to run, and I'm planning to run it. And it is, of course, a Forgotten Realms adventure, Dead and Thay. Thay is a country in the Forgotten Realms. So it's very Forgotten Realms centric. The NPCs, it's all Forgotten Realms coming out your ears. However, I am running my campaign of these adventures is not in the Forgotten Realms. I'm running in my homebrew world of Primordia. And I've already figured out how I'm going to make Dead and Thay a Primordia adventure. And I'll just tell you that in Primordia, this adventure is going to be called Blood of the Avatars. And I'll have to talk about that sometime after I've run it, so I don't spoil it for my players. And actually, just as a little teaser to hopefully inspire some of you to actually watch my sessions of this, Blood of the Avatars is a very carefully chosen title. And gosh, I feel like I'm putting too much of a lampshade on this. I'm going to give too much away, but hanging too much of a light on it. I can't get my metaphor straight. But anyway, this adventure and how I'm going to use it is actually going to reveal a secret about my world of Primordia that I've been sitting on for a long time. It's something that I've I came up with like in the very early days of designing Primordia, and I haven't mentioned it on the show. I haven't told anybody about it except my wife, Nikki. And in the early days, it was because it was going to be a big part of my adventure path, basically, that I was coming up with for Primordia, that I was thinking, oh, maybe one day I would publish it. And that could still happen. And now it's because I'm going to be using it when I run these players through Dead and Thay. So if you watch that on YouTube, you will finally find out what that is. And I may or may not talk about it on the show, but you'll definitely find out as we go through Dead and Thay. So Dead and Thay is a really awesome adventure. There's some really cool innovations in here. And one of the things I really like about it is the dungeon has something called, I think it's called threat level or something, but it's this mechanic where the more time the PCs are in the dungeon, this threat level increases, and it interacts with the random encounter tables, so that the higher the threat level, the more dangerous encounters you tend to get. And then there are also NPCs that the player characters encounter that can affect the threat level, and different things that they can do during the adventure that will either raise or lower that threat level. And it's a really cool mechanic, and another great innovation, I think, of a way to kind of put some time pressure on the players and say, hey, you don't have all the time in the world. You can't just take a long rest after every encounter, because the more time you spend in this place, the more aware of you the denizens are, and the more difficult and dangerous things get. And I think any good living, breathing dungeon should be that way, but it can sometimes be difficult as a dungeon master when you're running the game to know exactly how to pull that off. And I really like that this adventure gives you a very simple, very clear-cut, easy way to do that, and has a little system that you can refer to, so you can slowly over time, which this is going to take weeks, if not months, to play through this adventure. Over time, you're slowly ratcheting up that tension and that threat level. And I think it's really cool. And just like the mechanic in Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan that does a similar thing, it's something that I will probably refer to in future adventures that I run myself and design myself, just because I think it's a really cool way to accomplish that. So let me know if you would like to hear more about some of these adventures, specifically the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, White Plume Mountain, and Dead and Thay. I'd be happy to talk about them again after I've run them and kind of give a after action report on them, and talk about what it was like to run them, and do a more spoilery discussion of the adventures. But for this review, I'm trying to avoid spoilers as much as I can. And, it's a lot of adventures to talk about. But if you'd like to hear more about the specific adventures that I'm running that I'm going to have some experience with, I'd be happy to go into them in more detail in future episodes. So let me know. All right, the next adventure is Against the Giants. And this is actually 3 separate adventures, or was originally 3 separate adventures that have been put together. And this takes characters from 11th level to 14th level is what they say. Again, I can't verify that for sure, but that's what they say. Against the Giants was written by Gary Gygax, originally produced in 1981, as a compilation of 3 adventures written in the earliest days of the game. Those adventures were created and originally released in 1978, during the time when Gary Gygax was still writing the player's handbook for the original AD&D first edition game. So despite being, in a sense, older than the game itself, these adventures continue to hold a special place in the hearts and memories of D&D players of all ages. And I have to say, honestly, I'm not sure why, other than nostalgia. These, like the first 2 adventures in the book, these I found rather disappointing, especially since we just had Storm King's Thunder, which was a whole adventure path about giants, where we had, one adventure where the player characters go against a fire giant lair, and another adventure where they go against a hill giant lair, and another adventure where they go against a frost giant lair. And on top of that, we had Horde of the Dragon, or actually Rise of Tiamat, where they went against a frost giant lair. And here we go again. And it just seems redundant. I mean, the first adventure, they go against a hill giant lair. The second adventure, they go against a frost giant lair. And the third adventure, they go against a fire giant lair. This is the third frost giant lair in 5th edition. Are you kidding me? Frost giants really aren't that interesting to me. I don't know about you, but I'm just mystified. Other than the fact that it was written by Gary Gygax, and some people just think he's the cat's meow or whatever. Other than that, even though, does anybody remember Dave Arneson? I mean, God, why does he never get mentioned? I don't understand that. But anyway, other than that, I don't understand why these adventures were chosen. Like I said, they just did Storm King's Thunder. They did a whole book, a whole campaign about giants, and all the probably dozens, hundreds of adventures for D&D through the years. And they picked these 3. Now, I have heard from people that these are, some of people's favorite adventures from back in the day. But reading through them, I really don't know why. I mean, they're okay. They're fine, I guess. Kind of like Sunless Citadel and Forge of Fury. It's like they're fine. They're okay if you just want a kind of generic, nothing super surprising D&D adventure. But they're just a generic, nothing surprising D&D adventure. I don't know. I mean, they're okay, but I know there are adventures from D&D's history that are more innovative, that are more interesting, that are more fun, that are more unusual, or could have taught us something as dungeon masters about different ways to run the game, different things you can do with the game. So I don't know why they picked these. I really don't. So, they're, as part of Against the Giants, there are kind of 3 parts. And boy, I was talking about weak hooks. These adventures have the weakest hooks ever. Like, I don't think in those days they even had hooks. They were just like, this is the adventure you're going on because this is the adventure I'm running. But the hook is literally some powerful figures, political figures or whatever, the king of the land the players are in or whatever, or like, player characters, you must go deal with these giants and kill as many of them as possible. That's literally the hook. So the first one is a hill giant stronghold, and you go fight a bunch of hill giants. Then we have a frost giant stronghold. Go fight some frost giants. Then we have Hall of the Fire Giant King. Guess who you find there. And yeah. Now, I don't seem to have anything good to say about these events. They're okay. They're not terrible. They're not like, these are awful. But they're also like not anything special either. Like, I don't know. But one thing that is kind of cool with these is they will use different monsters to represent less powerful giants. So for instance, you might be encountering hill giants, but maybe these are non-combatant hill giants or they're younger hill giants or whatever. So they're not as, tough as a normal hill giant. So they'll tell you to use the stats for an ogre instead. And then, give them a couple things because he's actually a hill giant. Or maybe you encounter a frost giant and they're like, use the stats of a hill giant, but give him cold resistance or whatever. So that's pretty cool. Just as kind of an innovation that as a DM, you can kind of be like, oh, hey, here's a way that, if let's say I want to have an adventure about, I don't know, stone golems, right? And I don't want the PCs just to fight, hundreds of identical stone golems. Well, I could have less and more powerful stone golems. And instead of feeling like I have to completely design a whole new monster, I can just find a less powerful monster and reskin it as a stone golem. And it's not that hard to do. So, definitely check that out in these adventures. You can kind of see how they do that. And it's super easy. Just really using a monster that's the right size and, is the CR that you're looking for. And then just giving it the racial traits, of the monster that you're shooting for. So like a frost giant, I don't know if they have immunity to cold or resistance to cold, but if you're like, well, I want a lesser frost giant, so I'm going to use a hill giant. Well, you just take a hill giant, give them a frost giant's armor and weapons, and give them immunity or resistance to cold or whatever special abilities a frost giant would have. And it's a really quick and dirty way to have a lower CR frost giant. So, you can do that with any kind of monsters. Pretty cool. So that's Against the Giants, which again are kind of 3 adventures in one. And then finally, we wrap up this escapade with Tomb of Horrors. Now, if you pay much attention to D&D circles online, you've probably heard some, if not a lot, about Tombs of Horrors. There are people that love Tomb of Horrors. There are people that hate Tomb of Horrors. There are people who are indifferent to Tomb of Horrors, and everywhere in between. But it seems like everybody who's been playing D&D for a matter of time measured in decades has an opinion on Tomb of Horrors. I predict that the new generation of players who are being introduced to Tomb of Horrors through this product here are going to be like, I don't get it. What's the big deal? I don't remember who said it. I don't remember where they said it, but I remember people asking before this book came out, is Tomb of Horrors going to be as deadly as it was before? Or are you going to change the adventure to make it fit more in, kind of modern gaming philosophy and 5th edition philosophy, to make it more, quote, fair or whatever? And the answer was, yes, it will be as deadly as it was before. No, we're not fundamentally changing it. And although I don't know that I would say that they fundamentally changed it, it's definitely not as deadly as it was before. It's not even close. I've read the original Tomb of Horrors. I never played it. I never ran it. I wanted to run it because, this was when I read originally White Plume Mountain, because I was looking into adventures that people who've been playing for a long time were saying these were the best adventures of all time in D&D. And Tomb of Horrors was another one that was often mentioned along with White Plume Mountain. And so I looked into these adventures thinking, I can convert them to 5th edition and it'd be something fun to do. White Plume Mountain, I was like, yeah, this would be fun to do. Tomb of Horrors, I was like, oh God, I would never want to run this adventure. I'd never want to play this adventure. And that was kind of the end of it for me. It just wasn't for me. So I would definitely, I don't say I hate the adventure because I never played or ran it. But I would definitely be in the camp of people who think it's not an especially good adventure, and that unless you carefully choose the players and the time and the place that you're going to run it, and unless you make sure everybody at the table knows what they're in for, I don't think it's an adventure that's going to be fun for most groups. So why would you run it, right? But again, with all those caveats in place, I think you can run it and it can be fun, but you've got to take some steps to make that happen. So I'm not super familiar with Tomb of Horrors, but I have read it, and reading through this, I don't think it's as deadly. One of the things about Tomb of Horrors was there were so many ways to just die in that event. Just like, boom, you're dead. Like one roll of a die, or maybe not even a roll of a die, you just do the wrong thing and you're dead. And there are a few instances in this version of Tomb of Horrors where that kind of thing happens, where you get one saving throw or you do a certain thing and you're dead. And that's it. There's no, you take damage. It's just, you're dead. There's like 2 or 3 instances of that, but that's it. Everything else has been neutered. Like there are lots of traps that do damage and blah, blah, blah. And the damage is like middling, considering that they don't tell you what level to play this at. They just say high level. But assuming, that what they said is true, which it isn't, but when they said, each adventure will take you to the level you need to be at to play the next adventure, then Against the Giants supposedly takes you to 14th level. So by that reasoning, then this adventure is supposed to be doable by 14th level, maybe higher. And yeah, there are some instances where you can just flat up die. But other than those, the damage that you're taking in this doesn't seem like much at all for a 14th level character. Doesn't really seem like much at all for a 10th level character. So, a lot of the things that aren't just save or die or do the wrong thing and die, the things that just do damage or whatever, don't seem nearly as deadly as they were in the original version. So the fangs have been pulled on this, I think. And I think, honestly, that's unfortunate. Personally, when I was thinking about this before this book came out, and I was like, what would I like to see him do with Tomb of Horrors? Because I personally, I get why it's in here, and I guess in a way, from a certain perspective, it kind of had to be in here, but I wish that they would have picked something else. I think they could have found a better adventure than Tomb of Horrors. But I was like, well, if it's in there, how do I hope they'll do it? And personally, my preference would have been just completely revamp it, make it more something that would be appealable. It's not a word. Appealing. That's the word. That would be appealing to the modern gamer, who's not a grognard, and who doesn't like playing funnels. That would have been my ideal is like take the idea and the spirit of the adventure, keep that, but retool it, redesign it so it's more fun and it's more going to be more appealing to a wider, more diverse player group. Barring that, if they couldn't do that, then my next preference would have been keep it just as deadly and unfair and terrible as it was, and then people can experience what it was like to play Tomb of Horrors. You got to understand the history of Tomb of Horrors, part of which was, it was used in tournaments as a competition. How far can you get? Part of it was, it was kind of Gary Gygax's answer to cocky players with like uber powerful characters and to kind of be like, oh, well, you think you're so badass, I can still beat you kind of thing. So, you keep those things in mind and like makes a lot more sense the way it is. It's kind of like a test or a trial and it's designed to be unfair. That's part of the point. And back in the day, it was kind of a badge of honor not to beat Tomb of Horrors. I don't think many people beat it, at least that were that were playing under DMs that were running it fairly or the players weren't cheating. I don't think many people beat it. It was more, how far did you get? How far did you get in the tomb? What finally killed you in the tomb? Lots of people died before they ever got into the tomb. That is gone. I honestly, it's been so long since I read it. I don't remember what it was that killed you trying to get into the tomb, but I do remember there were a few ways, I think, that you could die before you even got into the tomb. And that doesn't really, you might take a little bit of damage, but it's not going to be a threat to a 14th level character or even a 10th level character. So, you don't have to worry about dying before you even get into the tomb now. But anyway, back then it was like a badge of honor to get anywhere in it at all. And it wasn't so much, did you beat it? It was how far did you get? I don't think it's going to be like that anymore because they removed a lot of the deadliness, but they left in some of the gotcha stuff, some of the things where there's really no way to know the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. You were either just really lucky and did the right thing, or you were unlucky and did the wrong thing. But there is no way to figure it out. There is still some of that in there, but it's just, overall the adventure isn't as deadly anymore. So I think that they kind of shot themselves in the foot with this adventure, because I think it's going to be just as annoying as the original and just as tedious and plotting and time consuming and frustrating and seemingly unfair and arbitrary as the original was, but it's not going to be as deadly. And if you get through it, it's not so much going to be a testament to your intelligence and your ingenuity and the effectiveness of your characters. It's just going to be a testament of, how many characters did you put through that funnel, or how long did you beat your head against that wall until you finally figured it out? And there's not going to be any real bragging rights to it because it's really, other than those few gotcha moments, it's really not that deadly. It's really not that challenging from a game mechanics point of view. So I think that this might be the end of the Tomb of Horrors debates, because I think just people aren't going to be talking about it anymore after this, because they neutered it. They defanged it. It's not anything to brag about anymore that you got through this, I don't think. I honestly think, personally, that this adventure as it is would be pretty boring to run and really boring to play. I wouldn't want to play it. Obviously I couldn't play it now because I read it, but it just seems like it'd be really boring. It doesn't tell you what level you would get at. Again, it doesn't even tell you what level to play this adventure at or what level it's for. And I have not added up the XP to see how much experience you get from this. So I have no idea, but it's pretty short, and I have a feeling my guess would be as high as your XP is at 14th level and beyond, that this won't probably be anywhere near enough XP to even get you one level going through this. So you don't even have that going for you. It doesn't have great treasure, unlike White Plume Mountain, which has awesome treasure. It doesn't have great treasure. I don't know. It's just blah. But hey, your mileage may vary. But I will say, if you're a big fan of the original Tomb of Horrors, I think you're going to be disappointed with this. And I think that you'd rather go get your original copy of Tomb of Horrors and convert that, because they've really pulled its teeth, I feel like. I might do Tomb of Horror sometime. I could see doing it as a one shot. You got to kind of wonder, like, who is Tomb of Horrors for? Okay, because there are those gotcha moments where your character can just die, really through no fault of your own, other than perhaps you're just not being paranoid enough. And so it seems like it's not a great adventure to run. Like, let's say you're doing a campaign. Let's say you're going to do a campaign using Tales of the Yawning Portal. You start at first level with Sunless Citadel. You play for a year or whatever. You finally get to 14th, 15th level or higher with these characters you've been playing for over a year. And now you're going to do Tomb of Horrors and your character dies just like that. Is that going to be a satisfying end of the campaign for you? Probably not. What if the whole party wipes? Is that going to be a satisfying end of the campaign for you? Probably not. So it doesn't seem like Tomb of Horrors is a great adventure to run at the end of a campaign that you've been playing with characters for a long time. Because even if you're like, hey, after this, the campaign's over, a lot of players that have put a year or more into their characters aren't going to find just dying randomly at the end of the campaign a satisfying end. It's like, yeah, I might be okay with my character dying at the end of the campaign, but I want it to be for a heroic cause or in a blaze of glory or something like that. I don't want it to be just to a stupid trap in a random dungeon somewhere, right? It's not going to be satisfying. So then you think, well, maybe Tomb of Horrors is for one-shots, which, totally makes sense. Like for a one-shot, this is a great adventure because it's like, well, who cares if my one-shot character dies? Yeah, I might care a little bit, but not nearly as much as I'd care about a character I've been playing for more than a year. But it's a high-level adventure. Who wants to make a 14th level character for a one-shot? I sure as hell don't. It's like, first of all, it'd take a lot of time to make that character. Second of all, I'd feel like I'd have to run the character through at least one adventure before I even felt like I knew that character well enough to play it effectively, because I've never played this character before. Unless, like, let's say I always play fighters in D&D and I've played a fighter up through 15th level and I make a 14th level fighter that's the same build as a fighter I played before, then maybe, sure, okay, yeah, that'd probably be fine, other than the time it would take to make that character. But let's say I'm playing a wizard. I've never played a wizard before, or I've never played a wizard past 9th level. I'm going to make a 14th level wizard and think that I know which spells to memorize and how to use them. I mean, right? I mean, yeah. So I don't know. Who is this adventure for? I don't know. So that's the last adventure. And then we have the magic items and the monsters, and that's it. That's the end of the book. We finally made it. So I'll wrap this up with kind of overarching final thoughts, bottom line kind of thing. Do I recommend this book? And, it's kind of my default statement in these reviews that I always say it really depends on who you are and what you're looking for. I would recommend it to most DMs, honestly, if you can afford to buy it. I mean, there are 7 adventures in here. They're all dungeon crawls to some degree or another, but it's a pretty wide level range. And I think that chances are pretty good that at least one of these adventures are going to appeal to you as a DM and you're going to be excited to run it. And even if not, there are lots of encounters you can use, lots of really cool traps and innovative and different traps that you can use. And some cool mechanics like the threat level, I think it's called, in Dead and Thay, and the mechanic in the Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan that keeps your player characters from just resting all the time, that you can learn from. There are a few new magic items and monsters, although I definitely wouldn't recommend buying the book for those. The monsters are a little bit better in the magic items, but the magic items aren't really anything special, and the monsters are okay, but it's not like you'd buy the book just to get the monsters. But like I said, I think there's a good chance that you'll like at least one of these adventures, probably more than one, honestly. Whether you're kind of a more old school DM or more new school DM. I don't know if we say that. There's a pretty good spread. So, Against the Giants, that was AD&D first edition. Dead and Thay was 5th edition playtest. Forge of Fury was 3rd edition. Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan was AD&D first edition. Sunless Citadel was 3rd edition. Tomb of Horrors was AD&D first edition. White Blue Mountain, AD&D first edition. No 2nd edition adventures and no 4th edition adventures, but a good amount of first edition and a couple 3rd edition. So, you get a good spread there. There are some cool NPCs in here. Dead and Thay has quite a few NPCs in it, so you can mine it for that if you're not even going to run the adventure. So, for most DMs, I think you'd get value out of it. I think that you'd find at least some of these adventures you'd want to run, and even if not, you'd still get some use out of it. I think if you're looking for a campaign, it really depends how much work you want to put into it. I mean, you could put these adventures together into a campaign, but you're going to have to come up with some satisfying way to tie them together. And at least in the case of between Hidden Shrine and White Plume Mountain, you're going to have to come up with some adventures of your own to fill in the gaps because there's not enough XP. Again, there may be other places in here that happens. I'm not sure. Or you're just going to have to, hand out a huge chunk of it XP for nothing at some point. I might recommend doing the milestone because then you can kind of wave away some of the XP problems, but you're still going to have like for instance, Hidden Shrine. I wouldn't recommend leveling the PCs during the adventure because if you level them to 6 during the adventure, it's going to be too easy. If you level them to 7th, it's going to be way too easy. So what are you going to do? Have them go through Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan at 5th level. And then at the end, you're going to level them from 5th to 8th so that they can play White Blue Mountain. I mean, even if you're doing milestone, you could do that, but it's not very satisfying. So you're probably going to want to come up with at least a couple adventures to run in between. So, if you're looking for a campaign to run, I'd get Curse of Strahd. I always recommend Curse of Strahd. It's the best adventure they put out yet for 5th edition. And that's a full not a full campaign. It'll take you to like 10th level, maybe a bit beyond, depending how you do it. Or, one of the other campaigns that they put out, like Storm King's Thunder, Princes of the Apocalypse is really good, Out of the Abyss, Tyranny of Dragons, those all, I think, go to 15th level. But, you could do it, Tales from the Yawning Portal, but it's going to take a lot more work because you're going to have to come up with some adventures of your own to fill in the blanks. You're going to have to come up with some kind of satisfying framework to tie everything together. And you're going to have to want to run all of these adventures, which you may not. Like me personally, let's see, there's 7 adventures in here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And of those 3 of them are adventures I want to run. So 4 of them I don't really want to run. So, if you're planning to do this as a campaign and you're like me and you look at it and you're like, half of these I don't want to run, then what are you going to do then? Now that's even more adventures that you need to come up with. So you might luck out and you might love all these and you can make a campaign out of it. But I think that this book will be most useful for DMs who are just looking for a single adventure, whether that's a single adventure to run as like a one-off, like, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to make characters and just do this one adventure, or an adventure just to fill a gap in your own campaign, whatever that is. Maybe you finish one adventure and you don't know what to do next, and you've got ideas for later on down the road, but not for right now. And one of these adventures will slot in nicely. I think it'll be great for that. But yeah, I think the most use for a DM is for a DM looking for a single adventure. And the nice thing about, things like this is they don't expire, right? So if you're going to be running D&D for a good length of time, maybe you use an adventure here, maybe you use one there. And maybe, after 10 years or so, you end up using all of them or most of them. But if my review doesn't decide you, if you're still not sure, I would recommend going to a brick and mortar store somewhere where you can sit down with the book and flip through it and just look through the adventures and see if there's something you'd be interested in. And it's way too much to just sit there and read. But I would recommend looking through and looking at the monsters in the encounters, and that can give you a good idea of kind of what the adventure is going to be like, what kind of NPCs you're going to be using. Also, you can look at the traps, and it's convenient because all those things are bolded for you. If you just have a short amount of time to skim it and see, would I be interested in this at all? That's kind of a shortcut way that you can get a feel for it. I think that's what a lot of people that do reviews like a day after the thing comes out have done. It's been a while since it's been out, but I like to actually read the book before I review it, and even read it more than once. I mean, it's hard enough to just read an adventure and then feel like you can review it without running it or playing it. Usually you need to read it at least more than once. And a lot of these people, man, the book's out less than 24 hours and they've got a review up. And, a lot of those reviews, unfortunately, once you chop out all the, let me tell you what the book is about, they don't really say much about the adventures themselves. So that's why I take a little bit longer. And even so, most of these, I feel like I didn't really have a lot to say because I haven't run them or played them. And even Hidden Shrine of Tamawakan, I've only done 2 sessions of it. So, like I said before, if one of the adventures I'm going to run you're interested in and you'd like to hear more about it, let me know, because I'd be happy to revisit the ones I'm running in the future after I've run them and kind of give you the lowdown then. I'm sure I'd have much better insight than I do now just having read the thing a few times. So yeah, let me know. Well, that is going to wrap it up for episode 153. I hope that you found this review of Tales from the Yawning Portal informative and helpful in deciding whether this is something you want to add to your collection. If you would like to get a hold of me, please visit the website starwalkerstudios.com. There you can find my email address, my Twitter, Google+, Facebook, Pinterest, and YouTube information. You can also find the Game Master's Journey voicemail number where you can call and leave me a message. If your question or feedback is entertaining or enlightening or both, you may even hear your message on the show. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future topics, I would love to hear from you. You can also find a link to the Game Master's Journey community where you can share ideas with other listener GMs. And finally, you can learn about the many ways that you can support the show by becoming a patron, by making a one-time donation, by using my Amazon referral link, or by checking out and purchasing my adventure for D&D, The Trickster's Labyrinth. You can find all this and more at starwalkerstudios.com. I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I hope you have a chance to run your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music courtesy of Cloudwalker, Transboy, Renfield, Stanko, and Ish. See the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.